welcome to Talking Out a Line. This show, as you know, is about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And this episode's theme is about law enforcement and DEIB. We'll be exploring the power of intersectionality in the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union. This episode's guest is Javier Luengo Garrido, who is the strategist and organizer for the ACLU in Massachusetts. I'll turn to my co-producer, Aiden, now to introduce Javier in a little bit more detail and tell us about all the cool stuff that he's up to.
Yeah, so Javier is in charge of organizing and strategizing the ACLU campaign around Western Massachusetts. Chilean born and raised, he worked as a political advisor for his university while still a college student. Later, after studying music in the University of Massachusetts Amherst, he began in the ACLUM at the peak of the Trump legislation in 2017. During his career, he worked with elected officials in the municipality and state legislation.
His work is based on immigration, civil liberties, and intersection of racial justice and technology. The ACLU is well known for the litigations in shaping the law to be inclusive to everyone. So we are definitely pro-ACLU here at Talking Out a Line. Luengo has been part of many important cases that protect immigrants in the United States that are many times mistreated and racially profiled against due to their country of origin. The bills that Javier has worked on passing have immensely helped hundreds and thousands of immigrant families from being mistreated, racially profiled against, and even torn apart. So now, before we jump into this amazing interview that Javier had with me, let's look at some statistics shocking in the field of DEIB and law enforcement.
In 2020, research was done where Americans were asked about their trust in police officers. 48% of American adults said that they had a fair amount of trust, while 26% had a great deal of confidence.
Out of the 26% of people that had a great deal of confidence in police officers, 32% were white adults, unsurprisingly, 18% Hispanic, 16% Asian, and again, unsurprisingly, only 10% Black. Out of the 26% of people with great confidence in police, 42% were Republican, who are often pro-police, and 13% were Democrats.
Yeah, so when it comes to employees, 72.4% are male and 27.6% are female. 86.9% of officers are male and only 13.1% are female.
So that shows that before the 1960s, police departments were guilty of hiring based on discrimination and biased against minorities and women. And clearly the statistics today are reflective of that disparity between minorities and women.
I mean, yeah, and even looking at the well-being of the officers, 80% of officers have reported critical stress levels, with 10% being suicidal, and 90% of officers never reached out for mental health counseling.
Right. And the mental health and well-being of officers is, I would say, critical to the success of law enforcement if it exists in the form that it does. And police need to, and law enforcement need to actually reach out to having services that are helping them out with being suicidal, as well as their critical stress levels, for them to avoid the kind of erratic behavior that we have seen by the police. Example being George Floyd and the many atrocities of killing Black people, as we know, that is happening on a regular basis in the United States of America. So now, with no further ado, I present to you today's guest, Javier Luengo Garrido, who certainly knows more about this than we do. And I'm happy to have him on our show, and thank you so much. So thank you so much, Javier, for being with us, and tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do for your organization.
First of all, thank you so much, Faria, for having me here. It's an honor. As you said, my name is Javier. I work for the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Specifically, my role is the organizing strategist. What I do, I run all the ACLU campaigns in Western Mass. I'm specifically located in Northampton. I also do lobby with elected officials, the municipal level and state legislature level. I'm originally from Chile, and sort of my field of work encompasses from immigration, civil liberties, and intersection of racial justice and technology.
Sounds good. So for those who don't know much about the work of ACLU, it's important for me as an host and as a producer of this show to request you to tell us a little bit about your organization so that people know more about it and the work that you're doing beyond just your particular role.
Absolutely. The American Civil Liberties Union, it's sort of a national organization that has different chapters in every single state, right? The ACLU is really well known for doing impact litigation. Impact litigation means that we litigate specific cases that are going to shape the law. Cases that where the ACLU historically has been known is LGBTQ cases, Roe versus Wade. For example, in Massachusetts, one of the most important cases that we have done in immigration in the last couple of years was an immigration related to immigration court. And you go to the Supreme Judicial Court of the state of Massachusetts to argue that case. And in that case, what came out of it was that before the case, when an immigrant would go in front of an immigration judge to ask for bail, for bond, the burden of proving that that person was not a danger to the community or a flight risk was in the defendant, in the immigrant, which is extremely unusual because, as you know, Faria, in criminal court is the government the one that has to prove that you are not a danger to the community. You are a danger to the community and you're a flight risk, right? In immigration court, it was totally upside down. So we went to court. We argued a case called Pereira Brito, which was the last name of our client. And starting from the decision of that case, we were able to achieve that the basic right that if an immigrant is requesting bail or bond, it's a responsibility of the government to show that that person is a danger to the community or a flight risk. Not but under no circumstances the immigrant has to show that. And that's what we call impact litigation. You shape the law using these really groundbreaking cases.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for providing us with the background, because I want our viewers to be able to understand your work in the context of your organization and the massive impact that ACLU has had on exactly the topics that you've been referring to. So please give us some of the highlights of your own work and your organization's work that you've been dealing with for the last few years.
So I just mentioned Pereira Brito, which was a case that my colleague Dan McFadden did in the Supreme Judicial Court. Besides doing impact litigation, one of the big things that we do is municipal work. During the last couple of years, we had passed in municipal level an ordinance, a municipal law that is called the Welcoming City Ordinance. One of the things that we were seeing is that the immigrant community during the Trump administration had a lot of fear. So high was the level of fear that they would be afraid of going to the police station to give a report of a crime, or if they were victims of a crime, they would then go to the police station, right? Because they were fearful. We passed a Welcoming City Ordinance in Springfield, Northampton, Cambridge, Boston, Greenfield, East Hampton. And what this municipal law, this law does is prohibits any city official to ask for your citizenship or country of origin. And the reasoning behind this is because if I'm driving, I'm undocumented, and I'm stopped by a police officer, and the police officer asks my citizenship, which, by the way, if I run a red light, it's not relevant to the case, right? Doesn't really matter if I'm from Honduras, the US, or Chile. If I run a red light, I just run a red light, right? But the problem was that because police departments and other departments were collecting that information, when Immigration and Customs Enforcement called them, asking them for the information, because they collected, they have to give it up. And now immigration would know this undocumented person was detained. That was bad from the point of view of immigrant victims not being willing to go to the police department when they were victims of a crime, but also to the point that families were being separated when mom or dad were being deported. So that's sort of one of the things that we do. We also were able to ban the use of facial surveillance technology at the municipal levels and also at the state level. What that means is that, you go to the street, you see, even in Boston or in Springfield, you see hundreds of pole cameras, which are cameras that are hanging from poles. Those cameras are recording 24/7. If to those cameras you keep adding software, there are different softwares. And there is one specific, which is the facial recognition software that would allow to track you, would allow to identify you. We feel that this is an overreach of privacy, a gross overreach of privacy. We do feel that this has to be regulated because also this kind of technology is totally unregulated. So at the municipal level, we ban the use of facial surveillance in cities like Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, again, Northampton, Springfield. And at the state level, which is another level of our work, we work with the legislator passing those bills. And last year, we were able to pass a regulatory bill with facial surveillance. So I talk about impact litigation, I talk about municipal work, and also we do work at the legislature.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So a lot of questions bubbling in my head, and one of them being maybe a cliched question, but I'll still go ahead and ask. What got you interested in doing this type of work? And how does your background from Chile contribute to the work that you do here in the United States for ACLU?
Well, so I'm originally from Chile. During my college years in Chile, I worked as a political advisor for the university chapters and university government of students. I came here, I studied in UMass. And
which department?
Music.
Music. Oh, that's amazing. So, because I went to UMass as well for my master's and my PhD.
Nice. So, and I have been working for the ACLU for the last 5 years, right? When I came to work for the ACLU, the highest moment of the Trump administration, when all the targeting, all the hatred against people of color was massive, right?
Yes.
When Trump gets elected, I'm working in the Northampton Public Schools. I'm seeing immigrant families. I'm working at that point in advocating with immigrant families. I used to go with immigrant families when they were meeting their immigration attorney, so I could help them to get all the documents and all the material that they needed to fight their case. So when Trump gets elected, it gets to a point that you start thinking it's now or never. I mean, the targeting, the hatred that was coming from Washington was massive. And families that I was already working with were being targeted, they're being separated, people were being deported. The reality also is that during the Obama administration, people were massively deported. What the Trump administration added is the deep targeting and racism of the policies enacted by the Trump administration, right? So that was for me a point was literally saying, if I don't commit myself to work against what is going on systemically, when? So that was 2017. 5 years later, I started at the ACLU working as the Immigration Protection Project coordinator. And for the last couple of years, I became the organizing strategist because the ACLU recognized that a lot of the work that we do is intersectional. So when we're talking about immigration and we're talking about immigrants, there is racial justice, there is technology that is being used to target. So little by little, I start working in different departments, for different departments, and with different experts. So right now, I'm working with every single department, almost in every single issue that the ACLU has.
Fantastic. So I'm glad to hear that there is an organization out there that is as big as ACLU that has interest and understanding and ownership of the term of intersectionality and how it plays out into the world, because so many organizations are completely against the idea of cross collaborations and or intersectionality even as a concept, and they deny it works, and they want to continue in a tunnel vision, which is just not how the world works. You can't look at environment without looking at environmental racism, for example. You can't look at environmental and sustainability issues, for example, without the lens of equity.
Yeah.
So the sooner we understand the intersectionality and its importance in whichever role we play in life, I think the better off our solution building will be across the board. So thank you. So let me ask you the next question, which is, what do you think are the unique challenges that you face on a couple of levels? One is working on ACLU in a hostile environment, in a divisive environment like the United States today, where half of us feel a certain way and half of us feel a completely different way about political matters. Things are very divisive and politicized. How do you feel as a Chilean American to be working on issues that are not so popular and that are risque? What is your sort of challenges that you face in this particular field?
This is an incredible, this is a really good question. Historically, as I said at the beginning, the ACLU has been known for impact litigation attorneys. For the last couple of years, we have been open to organizing, to working at the legislature, to do more impact in different ways, still centering our work in impact litigation and our attorneys, right? And one of the reasons why that happened, it's because, and I feel that I'm surrounded by extremely talented colleagues. And our executive director, Carol Rose, has been certainly a visionary from the point of view of that intersectionality that you were talking, right? Realizing that every single matter crosses paths sooner or later, for better or worse, and that we have to be vigilant and we have to be able to adapt, to pivot, she would say, the issue, right? So when we're talking about, so for example, when we're talking about facial surveillance, yes, people, the main way how people were being profiled and ended up in ICE custody was because of minor traffic infractions. We passed the facial surveillance ban because any kind of material that the city has can be requested by a federal enforcement agency. So if a city has hours and hours of footage that where you can see people's faces and you can run this kind of software, immigrants are going to be the first target, right? Because they were being targeted, because they were driving for minor traffic infractions. You know this better than I do. We live in Western Mass. To be able to go to buy a gallon of milk, we need to drive. So
yes,
if I'm being stopped because my right light is not working, all of a sudden things escalate, and because I don't have a driver license, because I'm undocumented, I get being detained. And after that, you know, all what we talked before. So right now, for example, we are part of a coalition that is fighting to get driver license to undocumented folks. Western Mass, it's a really good example of the reasoning why everybody should be able to drive, why everybody should be able to go through a process, to a test, written test and practical test to be able to do it. I have to drive to buy a gallon of milk. If I forget it, I have to drive. There is no way I can go walking. So that intersectionality, saying driver license, facial surveillance, the government, the municipal government gathering all this information, putting our community, our fellow members of the community in danger, is a kind of intersectionality that we see in between issues, right? So the ACLU has been able to work that through. Every single affiliate is different. So I can only speak about my affiliate in Massachusetts, but I have to say that we are lucky to have people of that really diverse background in the organization, including myself from Chile. But we have several other people of color. We have really talented colleagues. And the challenges, mostly in the outfacing challenges, is that realizing that you need to create the conditions and the narrative for people to realize what the issue is. When we start talking about driver license a couple of years ago, nobody knew. Nobody was paying attention. All of a sudden, in the middle of the Trump administration, realized that that's one of the things that they're using to target our community. We need to do something. The work of the coalition has been tremendous. The bill passed the House with 120 votes in favor, and now is going to go to the Senate. So the main problem was people, for the community, for people in the street to understand the issue, but also, and I think this is the most complicated thing, is not only to understand the issue, but also use empathy with what's going on to the other. That is not about, people, specifically in immigration, they talk about coming in the right way, right? If there is a woman who is being sexually assaulted in her country, and her husband is sexually assaulting her, and she goes to the street and she's suffering violence, and she's fleeing to the US, exercising the international right of asylum, I cannot take somebody in the community saying, oh, but she's, undocumented. No. Asylum is an international right. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves having to educate the community to understand that asylum is an international right. They may come to the southern border. There may be people coming in to JFK, to different airports. But when you're fleeing violence, you cannot go to the closest consulate from the US and ask for a visa, because violence doesn't wait. The gangs don't wait for you to get a visa before killing you. So the hardest part has been to create the narrative. The hardest part is to make understand people these kind of realities. But I do feel that we're this close to getting driver license for undocumented folks. So I think we're doing a good job.
Fantastic. And I think one of the challenges about your work is the mundaneness of the topics for some people. For example, people who are citizens of a country, driver's license just happens to them. It's a rite of passage after a certain period of time. So it's hard for people to even conceptualize that can be a barrier for some people, and a barrier enough for somebody to be removed from their home. And I'm not giving excuses by any means to the people who are not understanding, but I think the task that you have at hand is very complex, because you're basically having to build a narrative around what normal things that people take for granted, such as being able to go and drive a car and have a driver's license. And then that can be very complicated for some people. Some people aren't even willing to accept that. So it is very difficult.
This is really interesting because and I'm working in a couple of other things, right? One of those is accessibility, to keep the accessibility portion to open meetings. So during Zoom, city councils, school committees, subcommittees, every single the legislator, every single of these groups went online. So now anybody can go to those meetings using Zoom or any other platform that you're using, right? But that's going to come to an end, because that was an exception given by the governor, right? Our position as an ACLU is saying, hey, hold on, this is working really well. What about if, whoever wants to show up at City Hall for a meeting, they can do it. But people with disability, people working two jobs, that all of a sudden they get really tired at home and they just want to tune in because there is something important in City Council that they want to talk in here. Somebody, because of old age, there is mobility issues.
And also, how many times I'm a new mother, again, I have more than one
Absolutely.
child. So I always want to, and I have job, I have family, I have responsibilities, and I am a nursing mother, so I need to be around my baby. So essentially, all of those barriers prevent me from getting active in town governance and in city governance. And technology would be the way in which all of that could be overcome, because I could actually be part of it in the evening after all of my day's work is over. And the access is unparalleled with technology. This is technology used the right way. So I hope you can win this one.
And the parallel with what we were talking before is that I have heard elected officials or people saying, well, if somebody cares about an issue, they should just go to City Hall. Many times having the time to be able to go to these meetings that many times they last 3-4 hours in city council is a privilege. And many times there is a portion of our community that have that privilege and they exercise that privilege. And because that's their life, they don't understand that privilege, the privilege of time, the privilege of availability of time is not something that everybody has, right? So in the same way how you were talking about driver license, there is also the need of a narrative and the need of come together to understand that accessibility that is not necessarily the equivalent of everybody's reality, but it's adding a layer of access, adding a layer of understanding that not everybody has that privilege.
Absolutely. So I hope you are, I'll be following your work and hope you guys win this one about keeping technology alive for town governance and city governance, because I think we can't really go back to pretending COVID didn't happen and all the benefits that came with it when it came to technology. So I don't think we should just ditch it and pretend like it never happened and didn't open up those pathways. So I wanted to ask you, what is the advice that you'd like to give people that want to start out in doing work that you're doing that is changing the narrative and lives and of people who are underrepresented and historically marginalized in so many ways? And especially important question to you, because you yourself are a new immigrant to this country. And a lot of times new immigrants are afraid of speaking up because their status in the country is already vulnerable with the very politicized and divisive paradigms that we have of hateful, unwelcome behavior towards new immigrants. So what is the advice you can give people who are especially from historically marginalized communities who want to be doing the kind of work that you're doing without feeling fear of repercussions of their home being taken away from them?
It's complicated, isn't it? Because just to build in more.
I ask you complicated questions.
Which is good. Because I think we go back to the word privilege, right? So for example, the fact that I'm talking to you now is a privilege.
That's correct.
The fact that for example, I serve as a commissioner in the Northampton Policing Review Commission, and we were during 8 months. That's a privilege. It's a privilege for me to be on Zoom with elected officials and say that I don't trust the police department. That's a privilege, right? So one of the first things that we have to recognize is that, again, we were talking about the open meeting law, that privilege is not for everybody. It's not part of the life of everybody. Yeah. Those with privilege should be really cognizant of uplifting the voices of those with lived experience. So those with lived experience can work with their own community, because they understand what the community needs. They understand how the community thinks. They understand the language of the community, right? So if you are a young non-person of color activist, know your community, understand who is doing the work, partner with your fellow students of color to do this work, listen to them, understand what privilege is, where it's coming from, and how that can be used in a positive way to uplift voices. To activists of color, it's complicated. It's difficult. Many times, those amazing activists of color, they come to the forefront because somebody in their community got killed by the police, or something else, another tragedy happened, and that's terrible. They are fighting. They are there. I can see them. I know that not everybody can see them. I see you. I would tell them. First of all, I would say I see you, and in my life, I try to uplift their work and put it in the forefront and center of what I'm doing. When we're talking about driver license, we talk about leaders of the immigrant community uplifting their voices and saying, yeah, we know that, that there's going to be a database created. We know there is a chance that a bad government may use that database to target us, but we want driver license. That came from the leaders of the driver license movement, the immigrant leaders, right? That's what we have to do when we're talking about youth organizing in schools, youth, a little less youth organizing in college. We need to be able to be cognizant of what's going on around. One of the things that I really despise in the US is this concept of, if you are in college, you are not yet in the real world. Right?
Good point. And sometimes it's funny because I'm an academic, I'm a professor, and it seems like no matter whenever you're attached to universities and colleges, mostly the paradigm is that you are not in the real world ever. You're in a different world.
Yeah.
You're in the academic world versus the real world.
And I want to tell you,
it's a paradigm. It's a very odd paradigm.
It is a paradigm, and I would invite people to see it in this way. If your words, your actions can affect other people's life, you are in the real world. You are part, and you need to be a functioning part of it. So, for example, right now in UMass, there is I think it's a group of disabled students that they are doing these TikToks and videos, how they try to get into buildings in UMass that are not accessible. And they make videos, they show how they try to go around, how long they talk. It's incredible. It's magnificent. I
haven't seen them.
I'm gonna send it to you.
Please do.
It's incredible what they are doing, right? In Smith College, you have all the houses with Black Lives Matter on their walls. And I have talked to students at Smith, and they really know what Black Lives Matter is about, what the principles of the movement from Black Lives are, right? So I would invite those with systemic power from colleges, from universities, from high schools, to see the potential in students of color to lead, the potential to lead in their communities. Sadly, we still live in a society that you need a college degree to be taken serious. If that young woman, if that young man doesn't get a chance to be able to keep rising and to keep educating, things get really difficult. We need our community to have that access, and that access certainly belongs to those who are the gatekeepers in colleges and universities, and inviting those people to be part of the community, to identify the potential of people of color in middle school and in high school has to be key for those to be able to raise to the occasion and be the leaders that they need to be.
So I have being an educator myself, I have a very a specific perspective. And since we're talking about this, I'd love to ask you what you think about this. I feel that I don't feel safe that my multiracial children are going to schools, K through 12 in the United States, where teachers have not been trained in unconscious bias and also in treating children differently based on their skin color. Yeah. So I feel that all K through 12 teachers should be asked to go through unconscious bias trainings and go through mandatory trainings on treating children of multiple backgrounds in the same way. So I mean, I feel that we have a long way to go when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to education and inclusion. And being an educator in higher education, this problem really starts from kindergarten to K through 12. And we inherit it into the higher education system after that.
Yes.
So really, I feel that the problem needs to be solved from teachers and professors, and us receiving a lot of different forms of trainings and awareness programs that help us navigate our behaviors and our attitudes towards people who are different from us. And
I agree absolutely. And I think that what training in that specific situation with teachers, what creates is a common vocabulary, right?
That's correct.
A common understanding of the situations and sometimes, you know, stressful situations. I would add though, I would add to that, so for example, I was giving a presentation to a statewide group, people of color, and they asked me what's going on with the legislature in a specific bills. And I said, you know, if people of color want to legislators to legislate in their best interest, the first thing that needs to happen is that legislators need to look like us.
That's correct.
If a legislator doesn't look like me, it's going to be really hard, not impossible, but really hard for that person to understand my community, my person, right? Why I'm saying this? I strongly feel that academia in college and university and in high school, children, they need to see themselves in their teachers. They need to see the value of bilingualism. They need to see somebody of color teaching those subjects, uplifting them, right? The amount of times that I heard when I was working in public schools that, oh, you speak too white. It's like, why? Well, it's way too proper. Yeah, but I'm from Chile, so because I speak proper. Well, you know, and this was an Afro-Latino student. We need teachers. We need administrators to look like our community. The amount of times that I have seen in Western Mass and in school districts, somebody who is non-native Spanish speaker teaching Spanish and somebody who's white. It's interesting because, you know, we have Holyoke, which probably is the place with more Puerto Ricans outside Puerto Rico. And I will not believe that there is no people of color, Spanish speakers, prepared enough to teach at a high school or middle school level. I don't believe that. I think that the system is set up in a way that the information goes to a few ones that have the access to it. We need to start making things look like us. We need to make teachers look like us, administrators. We need to go to, when our kids go to college, they have to see their teachers looking like them.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can give you, it's not my interview, but I could give you so many examples of that playing out in my career as a professor. And so much of that is in display for me every day, pretty much in my work that I do. So tell us, Javier, what are some of your upcoming projects that we should be looking out for? What are some of the things you're working on right now that we should be looking out for, as well as where should we go to follow your work and the stuff that you do?
Let's start for coming things, right? So April 25th, I'm doing a Know Your Rights presentation at the Pittsfield Public Library. This is geared towards any kind of interaction with police enforcement. We're talking about federal enforcement agencies to local police or state police. It's going to be face-to-face. It's going to be presential, but there is an option to be over Zoom for people who still don't feel comfortable. Today, one of the things that we did, we have a day of action today. We were supporting strongly the open meeting law reform to allow the public to keep opting for remote access and remote participation and remote testimony. That's something today, several organizations posted videos of how important that is for them. In the coming months, the Senate is going to take a vote on the driver license. After the Senate does that, there is going to be a conciliation bill, hopefully coming out of the legislature. And hopefully before the end of the year, our community members, undocumented community members are going to be able to get a driver license. So all that's ongoing. We're also working to update the bill that we passed of facial surveillance last year. A commission to study the use of facial surveillance was created. They just came with the report. We're working with that report and talking to legislators. I think it's really important for the community to understand how that functions. we're protecting the civil liberties and the civil rights of people. So that's really important to be really aware how that can be used and should not be, and instances where it should not be used. Well, that for now.
That's a lot of things. It's just, I wanted to look forward to talking to you in the future to find out about how those things roll out. And I guess my last question to you would be, how do you and your organization get the ideas to work on one project? How do you prioritize one versus the other? That's a really good, interesting question that came up in my head. With all of the things that you do, how do you create priorities?
So as a diverse organization, the ACLU in Massachusetts, we go through a pretty thorough feedback process that every single person within the organization has a say. And we create all together a plan that, and obviously that plan after is presented to our board, right? But when we're talking about all the specific issues that I had mentioned so far, the commonality of those issues was that if the driver license passes and becomes a reality, if facial surveillance is regulated, if the open meeting law reform passes, those are concrete changes that are going to make the life of our community better. And I think that's paramount in relation to the work that we do. In the same way how we talk about impact litigation, we do impact advocacy. And that advocacy is impactful proportionally to the change and how concrete it's going to make how better concretely the life of our community is going to end up being, right? So that's sort of the guiding principle. The sort of the in-between, which is all these internal discussions and all what we're seeing in the field, what we're seeing in the legislature, what we're seeing in the legal field too. It's part of it. But the guiding principle is that we want to be impactful. We want to make a change that is quantifiable, that people can feel it, a change that is going to actually make life better.
Sounds good. Well, good luck to all of your projects coming up, and I look forward to talking with you. Thank you really a lot being on the show. I'm sure the audience and I certainly enjoyed hearing about all of the work in detail that ACLU does, and your specific and unique perspective as a Chilean American immigrant in the United States, putting yourself on the line and doing work that is basically groundbreakingly I'm going to go as far as to saying it's dangerous for you in some ways. And you're putting yourself out there and doing the good work, and good luck to you. And it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having Faria. I really enjoy it. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.